I used to drive a distance of 1,000 miles once every month to spend time with my children who live with their father. My ex-husband and I got divorced 9 years ago, and I willingly gave him custody of the children because of my history with substance abuse. Before I continue with the story, I think it's important to note that I've been sober since the divorce. I checked into rehab program and I've stayed clean since. But getting back to the story, I was running low on gas with another 200 miles to go, and so I stopped at a crummy gas station on the way. This wasn't one of those big service stations that you normally see on the highways. Nope, it was just a simple gas station with a convenience store next to it. I got out of the car and had to step inside the convenience store because it was one of those pumps that you need to pay the cashier first. The music was being played loudly inside and a woman was manning the cash register. I paid the cashier $20 and asked her for the keys to the restroom. She told me that the customer restroom was under repairs, but that she'd let me use the employee restroom. I thanked her, walked into the hallway in the back, and stepped into the restroom. It was kind of spooky because the door was made of metal. Not entirely, but both sides of the door had thick metal panels held by rivets. It looked like a movie prop straight out of a horror flick. In any case, I did my business and got out to fill up the car and leave. Once in the hallway though, I sensed right away something wasn't right. I slowly walked toward the front of the store while whispering, "Hello?" But the cashier lady didn't answer back. I walked closer and closer to the cashier when a man suddenly ran toward me from the inside the cashier booth. I turned around and ran toward the restroom as fast as I could. I slammed the door behind the man in the nick of time because as soon as I slid the bolt to lock the door, he slammed against it to try to force it open. I could hear him kicking and punching the door, and every time he would, the door hinge would ever so slightly pop out toward my side of the restroom. I leaned against the door to try to make sure he couldn't further damage the hinges. I felt semi-safe in there because there was no window for him to break through. He kept at it for at least 5 minutes, then I suppose he realized he wasn't breaking through with kicks and punches because the banging stopped and it was dead quiet outside. Before you ask me why I didn't call the cops, I have to tell you that this was back in 2001, and not everyone was carrying a cell phone in the early 2000s. So I just stayed in the restroom with no plan or way out of the situation. The thing that scared me the most was the possibility of the man setting fire to the convenience store to smoke me out like an animal. I was in there for 3 hours until I heard someone speak outside. It was a man and he asked if someone was in the restroom. I answered yes, but didn't open the door out of fear that it could be the same person who tried to attack me. The man outside said he was a cop, and I told him that I couldn't open because I couldn't be sure. He tried to make me open the door for several minutes, but I still didn't open the door for him. He then spoke to someone on the radio and told me to listen in on the conversation. I did, and it was enough to convince me that it was indeed a cop. I opened the door and the cop had his gun pointed at me, which scared the crap out of me. He cuffed me and told me that it was for both of our safety. He led me out of the store by shielding me with his body so I couldn't look toward the cashier booth. I obviously didn't have to see it to know that the lady was probably dead. After being interviewed by the cops, then being cleared of all suspicion, I learned that the cashier lady was in fact murdered. Her throat had been slashed, and I couldn't hear the ruckus during the struggle due to the music playing on the loudspeaker. It certainly was a tragic incident, but I would not have been so scared if not for the fact that the killer didn't take anything from the store. He took no money, cigarette, beer, or anything. He came in to kill the cashier, and that's all he was after. They never caught the guy and lamentably didn't even have a suspect. I continued driving on the stretch of road for many years thereafter until my children were old enough to attend college out of state. I never once left without a full tank of gas, and when I stopped for refueling, I would always stop at one of the bigger service stations along the way. Till this day, whenever I drive on the highway and see other cars on the road, I often wonder if a killer might be right behind me. A few years back, my girlfriend and I were on a road trip to visit her parents. It was roughly about 20 hours drive, plus minus 2 hours depending on the traffic condition. We would normally make this drive in one shot, taking turns on the wheel, but on this trip Lindsay couldn't drive because she had 2 broken fingers. I was done after driving 14 hours straight. I told Lindsay I had to get some rest, and we decided to sleep a few hours at the next service station. It was close to midnight and staying in a motel would have been nice, but neither of us were making that much at the time and we wanted to save money where and when we could. We pulled into a decent-sized, well-lit service station. Both of us quickly went to the restroom to do our number ones and came back to the car for some much-needed rest. We fell asleep right away, but I woke up a couple hours later because of a noise I thought I heard. It seemed like someone was walking outside, and I also heard something making contact with the window. I couldn't see anything, and so I went back to sleep right away. The sun was up by the time we got up. The original plan was to wake up after 4 hours of rest, but I guess we were too tired to hear the alarm go off. I was rubbing my eyes because I couldn't see well, when my girlfriend screamed like she saw a zombie outside. I asked what was wrong and she told me to look at the windshield. There were 2 Polaroid photos taped on the exterior of the windshield. One of the photos was of me and Lindsay sleeping, and the other was our plate number. We were so sound asleep that we didn't even realize there was a camera flashlight popping outside. I didn't touch the photos because I thought there could be prints. I was wrong. We called the police, they got our statements, and took the photos as evidence. We were informed a few days thereafter that the photos were clean. The cops told us that the Polaroid films were handled with gloves and that there was nothing more to continue the investigation with. Lindsay and I are still together and we still take the same road trip a couple of times a year, but suffice to say, we learned our lesson the first time around. We no longer sleep at rest stops, and I would advise highly against trying to save money by doing what we did. I used to work at a gas station as a cashier from the age of 18 to 20. I thought I'd find something better to do after graduating high school, but the harsh reality was that even the cashier jobs were at a premium for people like me. This was about 1 year after I began working at this gas station when I had the craziest experience ever. I worked the graveyard shift and therefore always began work at late hours. At about 2 a.m., this guy who was fully naked comes in, looks straight at me and says he's hungry. I ask him what he wants and he repeatedly says that he's hungry. I want to shift his attention to something else other than me so I could call the cops. I tell him he could have anything he wants in the store and he went straight for the cold cuts in the refrigerator. The thing about that is, the fridge with the cold cut is in the station where we make our sandwich, and it unfortunately has a direct line of sight to where I'm standing, making it very difficult to make a call without alluring the crazy. I carefully made small movements to not alarm the man, but he would sense every little twitch. He was chomping on the ham like an animal and wouldn't let me out of sight. He probably ate at most 1/3 of the ham and the rest were scattered on the floor. He stopped eating and looked straight at me when he had only a small piece of ham left in his hand. He then slowly walks toward me and I back away at equal speed. When I feel the counter hit my back, I was concerned. When you are in a situation like that, dozens of thoughts cross your mind in a split of a second. I was thinking, do I make a run for it? Should I try to calm him down? Perhaps grab the stool and take a defensive stance? That's when the butt-naked crazy lunges toward me, and I do the same in the opposite direction. I jumped over the counter and ran out of the store. I didn't look behind me, but I knew I wouldn't be fast enough to open the door to my car, enter and lock the door before the crazy could get to me. So I just ran and ran into the darkness of the two-lane parkway until my legs felt like they would explode. I walked the rest of the way into town, all the way to the police station. The police went to check the gas station, but they couldn't find the crazy there. In fact, he was never seen in town after that. I don't know what he would have done to me had I been a step too slow. I can't be sure, but my gut feeling is that he would have done the same that he did to that ham back at the store. It makes me squirm to think that the man could have shredded my face to 1,000 pieces. I'm originally from Russia, and this story took place in my mother country before I came to the US. I'm aware that you Americans have many roads that have nothing on them for miles because of the sheer size of your country. But when you consider the fact that Russia has less than half the population of the US and nearly twice the size of landmass, you probably could understand why I think your roads are kinda cute. So this one night, I'm traveling on a desolate stretch of road. I'm driving with no passengers and have been on the same road for about 50 miles. I've driven on this road many times before, and therefore I'm very familiar with the route. The nearest town from this point was about 40 miles away, and for my destination, I still have another 200 miles to go. I saw a car pull up behind me at high speed, and since I had no intention of going any faster, I steered the car slightly to the right so the car in the rear would know to pass me. I drive like that for nearly a minute, but the idiot continues to tailgate my car a little too closely. I bring the car back to the center of the lane, and the idiot turns on his high beam. I hate to admit it, but I begin to feel a bit spooked out. I want this guy off the back of my car as soon as possible, and so I steer the car to the right again for him to pass me. He does this time and slowly begins to speed up, but only up to the point where our cars are lined up vertically. I could sort of make the shape of a man inside the car, and I could also see that he has no passengers on board. That's when he pulls something up, and that something is a gun because he shoots at me 3 times before I have the chance to slam on the brake. I come to a screeching stop, and the shooter does the same at a fair distance. I check to see if I'm shot, and thankfully I'm not. I feel a draft coming in from the left window and see that it's been shattered. One of the bullets went through the window to the right, another one through the windshield, and the third one must have missed its target. The driver makes a U-turn and his car is now facing mine. It's getting real cold with the windows shattered, and I tremble like a leaf. I feel something dripping from my forehead, so I wipe it off with my hand. I look at it, and even though it's dark, I know it's blood from its consistency alone. The shooter wraps his engine, and I've got a decision to make. I could either make a quick U-turn and try to outrun him, or I could play chicken with him, with my head down of course. I choose the latter with little hesitation when the shooter accelerates toward me. I put my head down, hoping that I'm driving straight. I hear multiple gunshots, and then a few seconds later, there is an unmistakable sound of a car rolling. I pop my head up just high enough so I could see the road. I begin to decelerate to normal speed after a minute of driving like a madman. I didn't see it happen, but I was sure the shooter chickened out the last moment and probably rolled his car into the field on the side of the road. I had to make a stop at the next town and stay at a motel overnight. I would have froze to death had I continued driving with multiple shattered windows. I used to take that route to sell hard-to-find items in remote towns. It was not a bad business, but needless to say, that was the last time I drove on that stretch of road. Some of the craziest shits happened on the roads of Russia. For those of you Americans who feel especially adventurous, I highly recommend road trips to remote places in my mother country. I used to run a small business that unfortunately went belly up in the late 90s. This happened when I was 32, and I somehow ended up working at a gas station located in some shithole of a place in Arizona. The station itself was located in the middle of a town, if you can call it that, because it was really tiny. The entire population of the town was something like 300, so that should tell you everything you need to know about this shithole. I used to pump gas 2 days out of the 6 I would work. The other 4 days I worked the cash register at nights. At around 10 p.m., the road was empty as per usual, and it felt like I was the only person alive in the whole world. I was used to this by then, but still, it's a feeling that you can never be too comfortable with. I was trying to think of good things to pass the time when a black sedan pulled into the parking lot. A man in a black suit who looked to be in his late 50s came out of the car and walked into the store. He looked at me, smiled, and said, "Slow night, huh?" "It's always slow around here," I answered. He then walked around the store grabbing some random items, then putting them back in the shelves. I kind of felt uneasy thinking that he might be here to rob me. "Are you looking for anything in particular?" I shouted loudly so he could hear me. From the back of the store to the front of the cash register, he didn't break his stare, he didn't blink not once, and slowly walked over to me. He stood there, still haven't blinked once, and still staring me down. I don't even know how long, but maybe a minute or two later he says, "Do you believe in God?" I do. I sort of mumbled the words. "Ah, man of faith. Then you must believe in the devil as well, do you?" "I suppose I do," I sheepishly answer. Then he leans over toward the counter and tells me, "Son, I don't know what you did to piss him off, but I can smell his bloody stench all around the store. I wouldn't stick around too long if I were you." He said those words and casually walked out of the store. He then got inside his car and waved at me smiling before he drove off. To be clear, nothing happened that night, and for the next 15 days for that matter, until I quit the job. I wish I could say that I brushed him off and went about my business as usual, but that's not exactly what happened after our encounter. It wasn't like anything strange happened after that, but it was more along the line of just remembering him. He had a presence about him that's hard to explain. For example, I'm 6'5" and weigh 240 pounds. I'm a big guy wherever I go, and I don't get intimidated by anyone. But that old man, he made me feel like a helpless little boy, and I could hardly answer his questions right. That's why I quit the job 15 days after the encounter, and I was on the bus headed out of town on the same day. Nearly 20 years later, I can confirm that I haven't met anyone who could intimidate me like the old man. Not on purpose, but intimidation is what I do just with my size alone. I often see other men shrivel like a penis in ice water when I stand near them. So what the old man did to me isn't the sort of thing I'm used to feeling. I'm not insinuating what he was or what he could be. For all you know, he was just a charismatic old man, and maybe I shit my pants for no reason. What I could tell you though is that I practically fear nothing in this world other than bankers. But when I think of that old man, I actually shrivel like a penis in ice water. Growing up, I've always had this fascination with Route 66. When I was really young, I remember my best friend telling me about the devil roaming the road at nights. But as I got older, I've always admired the vastness of it and wished to experience driving on the road one day. So a few days after my 20th birthday, I packed up my camera gears and drove off to Route 66. I was driving through Amarillo when I saw a dirt road stretching endlessly into the desert. The view was breathtaking, and it was just begging for me to come. I was a little worried that I might get lost, but it was daytime, and on top of that, it was all flatland everywhere. As long as I didn't drive too far from the main road, I knew I'd be fine. 2 miles into the dirt road, and the vista was magnificent. If the view from the main road was the entrance to heaven, then I was now in heaven. I stopped the car, grabbed my camera, and began taking photos of everything. I must have spent at least 2 hours there because I went through 3 bottles of water while taking the photos. I was about to wrap up the shoot when I could see a car driving toward me. I thought maybe someone wanted to ask for directions, or maybe they were here for the same reasons I had. When you are on a trip, you are kind of on a high and you tend to think positively of everything. I was actually very happy to see another person who potentially loved the same things I did and looked forward to a nice conversation. That is, until the car stopped and a burly man got out of it, holding a gun. I didn't know what to do. I was too far from my car to make a run for it, and I sure wasn't strong enough to fight him, even if he didn't have a gun with him. I just stood there like a deer in headlights, helpless, scared, and nearly losing my mind. The man walks over to me and strikes me with the butt of the gun. I feel dazed and confused, laying on the ground, powerless. I can hear his footsteps, then suddenly, I feel something hard pounding on my face. I put my arms together in front of my face to try to block the kick or punch whatever I was being hit with. Then I hear the man reposition himself, and a second later, I feel something pop inside of my stomach. I didn't feel much pain at first, but now my face and ribs feel like they're being poked with an ice pick 1,000 times a second. I try to crawl away from him, but he pulls me back and hurls me some 2 yards like a ragdoll. I then hear him unholster a gun, a sound which I'm very familiar with because I grew up around guns. He didn't say a single word throughout this violence imposed on me, and all I could hear now is the sound of him releasing the safety, then the metallic sound of the slide moving to chamber around. I hear a click, but no other sound. The gun misfired. I hear the man struggling with the slide, and a few seconds later, he seems to give up. My eyes seem to be messed up because I can't see well, but I can hear everything, and what I hear now is the sound of a blade unsheathed. I'm crying, begging him to let me live. The sound of a gun is scary, but a blade, it's terrifying. I hear his footsteps, that crunchy sound of the dirt rubbing against the boots. I think I'm good as dead, but then I hear the honking of a car, and less than 10 seconds later, I hear a car driving close by us. I woke up at a hospital 2 days later. I learned that I'd been saved by a good Samaritan who scared off my attacker and brought me to the hospital. The final tally of my injuries were 2 fractured ribs, fractured skull, broken nose and fingers, multiple lacerations, and 2 black eyes. But you know what? I was lucky to be alive. I spent the next month and a half recovering at the hospital, and I also got to meet the hero who saved my life. His name is Charlie, and he was 81 years old on the day that he saved me. Sadly, he passed away 6 years ago, but thankfully, I was able to attend his funeral. Oddly enough, I had lost and regained my faith in humanity on the day of the attack. Wherever you are, Charlie, I thank you and I love you, old man. In August of 1995, I went on a road trip with my friends Michael and Benjamin. We were passing through Georgia headed to South Carolina, where we planned to stop by to see an old friend from high school. By 1 a.m., I had driven for 3 hours and it was Michael's turn to drive. We made a quick stop on a shoulder so I could give him the wheel. I was tired and quickly fell asleep after that. I woke up at 2:20 a.m. when I heard Michael cuss out loud. I asked him what the hell he was doing and got real pissed off upon hearing his answer. We had run out of gas because idiot Michael didn't stop to refuel, as I told him to before going to sleep. We were in the middle of nowhere and didn't see a single car on the road. Things were worse than I thought. Not only were we out of gas, but Michael had taken the wrong exit as well. We pushed the car to the side of the road, discussed the situation, and decided that it'd be best to sleep until daylight. I mean, what other choice did we have? To tell you the truth, it was kind of fun in the most moronic way. It was dark and spooky, absolutely the perfect setting to talk about scary things. We couldn't go to sleep, so we kept talking about horror movies and urban legends. It felt like we had traveled back in time on a time machine. It was just like the times when we were kids and used to talk about the most impossible things in the back of my dad's pickup truck. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. About an hour had passed just like that when we saw a pickup truck approaching. All three of us got out of the car and waved at the truck for help. I didn't have high hopes, and I was right because the truck continued driving past us. We all sighed in disappointment and was about to get back in the car when the pickup truck stops, makes a U-turn, and comes back to our direction. We all say yes and fuck yes, but then the truck drives past us again, but this time it stops a few seconds thereafter, makes a U-turn again, and parks itself on the side of the road. So we are parked on the same side of the road at a distance of about 20 yards. The driver then turns off the engine and the headlights. All three of us are standing there dumbfounded, unable to understand what the hell just happened. We got back in the car and discussed about why the driver would ignore us like that, only to park itself so close to us. We have many theories, but none are good. That's when the driver gets out of the truck, looks in our direction for a while, and then walks into the woods by the side of the road. He wouldn't come back for nearly half an hour, and by now we are all starting to worry for our safety. It felt like we were sitting ducks staying inside the car like that. So I grabbed my pistol from the glove compartment, get out of the car, and purposely released the magazine out, put it back, and pulled the slide back to let him know we were packing heat. I told Benjamin and Michael to get out of the car and would stood behind the vehicle facing the woods. Not more than 2 minutes later, the driver comes out of the woods, gets back in his truck, and as he drives past us, we go around our vehicle to take cover. He left and never came back. When morning came, we had to walk 7 miles to the nearest town to get gas, but thankfully a nice old lady drove us back to our car. We still talk about that night whenever we get together, and our consensus is that the guy has some bad intentions for us. We think he was packing heat, and he either wanted to rob us or something worse. We can't really be sure of anything, but I can tell you this for sure. Thank God for Second Amendment. The experience which I'm about to share with you happened, I believe, in the summer of 1993. Oh boy, you know you're getting old when you can't recall the years of some of the most important events in your life. But anyhow, this was back in the days when my wife and I were still dating. We were together for a year, and this was during our first ever road trip together. We left from Delaware, stayed in Virginia for 3 days, and was passing through Tennessee, our final destination being Arkansas. Brianna's sister lived in Arkansas, and she thought it'd be nice to end our trip at her sister's place. We couldn't find a suitable motel until 1 in the morning. We did our research before leaving, but must have gotten the wrong information because we couldn't find the place we planned to stay at. Traveling was kinda shit like that before the mainstream use of the internet. So we settled. We decided to stop at a flea-infested looking motel on the way, since it was only for a night anyways. We parked the car and went inside to the front desk. I hate to say this, but I have to be honest with my impression of the clerk. He looked really dumb, and the way he spoke only made him look dumber. Anyway, we got a room, but when we asked where the room was located, the clerk told us to follow the numbers in a dismissive tone. It didn't surprise us, it really was a shitty motel. We followed the numbers, but there was no room 112. I was about to turn around to go back to the clerk, but then Brianna told me that the hallway continued toward the rear of the motel building. We followed it and voila! There were 2 rooms there, room 112 and 113. Why they would build a motel this way, who knows? Maybe originally they were building a maze? Your guess is as good as mine. But yeah, I was tired and really wasn't amused by it. I let Brianna in first, walked back to the car and parked it in front of our room. Then I went inside and just slept without even taking a shower. I was really enjoying my slumber when I was awoken by the sound of a freaking orgy. I kid you not, this was a real orgy. I could hear multiple women moan and a man squealing like a pig. Luckily, it wasn't coming from the next room. I think it was more like the sound traveling through the air vents, but it was loud enough to wake me up. I carefully got up because I didn't want to wake up Brianna and went outside to have a smoke. It was nice because the room we were staying in is in the back of the building, and since there was no one out there, things were really peaceful outside. I chain smoked 3 cigarettes because I didn't want to go back inside, but eventually I had to go back in, praying to God that the orgy was done and over with. I went inside and was disappointed right away. They were still going at it, some were crying, some were laughing, and the man was still squealing. I sat on the couch instead of going back to the bed. I must have been really tired because I found myself waking up on the couch in the morning when someone knocked on our door. I got up, looked through the peephole, and there was a police officer standing outside. I opened the door for him and right away he asked me if I was okay. I told him yes and asked him what was going on. Brianna and I were escorted to the police station, and there they told us everything that's happened at the motel overnight. As it turns out, the clerk who gave us the room wasn't actually a clerk. He was one of the 5 men who robbed the motel overnight, and I suppose you could say that he was the lookout among the assailants. They took hostage of the male clerk and 2 women who were staying at the motel, then took turns on them all throughout the night. I woke up to the sound of people being violated and not the sound of an orgy. I threw up on the floor as soon as I could make sense of the previous night. The rush of emotions was nauseating. I felt guilty for not recognizing right away that something wasn't right. It was disgusting and troubling how anyone could do such thing to another human being. But I was also relieved that we got out of it without a scratch. So this is where we go back to the previous night at the front desk and why me mentioning the appearance of the clerk was unpleasant but necessary. When I said he looked dumb, it was a politically correct way of saying that the young man looked slow. I guess a better way of putting it would be that he seemed like someone with cognitive disability. He randomly picked out a key from the wall and just happened to give us a room in the back. Out of sight, so out of mind. The other 4 assailants were already in a room with their hostage, and the fake clerk must have forgot about us by the time his partners of crime were done with their acts. Imagine if we were given one of the rooms at the front of the motel. Not only that, what if I didn't bring the car to the back of the motel? They would have done the same horrific things to us as they have to those poor people, and who knows how much worse things could have gotten. Anyway, we were called back by the police one more time after the incident for an additional interview, but the case went nowhere. Those animals were never caught, and who knows how many more people fell victim to their evil in all these years. I still feel guilty for not comprehending the situation right that night, for letting those innocent people be violated all throughout the night. Regrettably, my guilt won't change anything. Two years ago, me, my wife, and our 2 kids were on a month-long road trip that began in San Jose and was supposed to end in Texas. Texas being the final destination because that's where both my wife and I hail from, and most of our family still live there. I think this was a week after we left our home in San Jose, and we were just about to arrive in San Diego. We had to make a brief stop at a rest stop because my youngest needed to poop. It was a huge complex that had everything in it. and there were a ton of people inside. Jack, my older one, wanted to hit the arcade while his mom and brother were using the restroom. We did, and we were having lots of fun when a man walks over to us and proclaims he could better Jack's top score. Jack was playing a pinball machine, by the way. He was friendly and funny, so all three of us took turns on the machine, and in the end, Jack came out on top. We exchanged the typical pleasantries after that. The gentleman's name was Julius, and they told us that he was traveling to Texas as well. That was that. My wife came back with Evan, and we left after saying goodbye to Julius. 5 or 6 days later, we arrived in Phoenix and met Julius again at another rest stop. We were all happy to see each other again and found the coincidence very amusing. All of us had lunch together, but went our separate ways afterward because we planned to stay another day in Phoenix and Julius was leaving. We got a hotel room at 2 in the afternoon, took a shower, went out, and enjoyed the rest of the day. When we came back to the hotel at night, we found out there was a fire in the building. It must have been pretty big because we could see 2 rooms that were scorched black from the fire damage. The area was taped off, and the hotel staff told us that we could go to our room, but we couldn't stay. Before this, I've never been in a building that's been partially burnt off from a fire accident. As it turns out, the smell after the fire is obnoxious. In fact, our room was located at a fair distance from the rooms that were on fire, and yet everything in our room smelled like the chemical residue after a fire. We got a partial refund and left the hotel right away. My wife wanted us to find another hotel, but I didn't feel like sleeping much after witnessing the aftermath of the fire, and I told her that I wanted to drive us to Tucson, which was our next destination. The kids slept in the back seat, and my wife tried to stay up for me, but she soon fell asleep as well. Traffic was light, very light, and I say that we had another half an hour to go to arrive at the hotel we Googled before leaving. That's when I saw a car closing in fast from the rear. Then it slowed down right next to us to match our speed. The interior of the car was brightly lit because its dome light was on. In there, I could see a familiar face. It was Julius. He was smiling, his gaze was switching from the road then to me every few seconds. But you couldn't find a trace of smile on my face. I was concerned as any normal human being would be. I mean, we saw this guy twice at 2 different rest stops, supposedly all by chance. Then here we are, on the road side by side, even though Julius was supposed to have left Phoenix much earlier in the day. This was not a coincidence. I knew I wasn't going to outrun him in my SUV, but not that was an option since I had my family with me. I didn't want to scare my wife, but I woke her up anyways and told her to search for the nearest police station. She was freaking out after she learned of the why, but nonetheless, she began giving me directions to the police station. We took an exit after 5 minutes of drive, then we called 911 when we saw that Julius was running right behind us. We had already jotted down his plate number on the highway, and so we relayed that information to the police. My wife would look behind every so often, and she'd tell me that Julius was waving and smiling at her. That was unnerving and terrifying, to tell you the truth, but I did my best to at least act composed. We found the police station and stopped the car right up front. Our kids were still sound asleep, and so my wife and I each took one of our kids and ran straight into the police station. You have no idea how relieved we felt. I thought I was seeing the faces of angels when we saw the police officers. I quickly explained to them what was happening, and one of the policemen ordered another to give chase after the vehicle in description. They caught Julius, although his name isn't actually Julius. Apparently, he wasn't a bloodthirsty psycho, but merely a very highly functioning insane man who had recently escaped a psychiatric hospital. The police didn't think it posed any threat, and looking back, neither do I. However, without knowing the context of the incident, during the time that we were the unwilling participants of Julius's little getaway, for us, it was the most terrifying thing we had ever experienced. That about wraps up this video, folks. I haven't done one of these long videos in a while, and so I thought it was about time. I could have split it in half and published them separately and also much sooner. But I know many of you guys enjoy these long videos, so I'll do this time to time, but only occasionally because I don't like the channel going without content for too long. Let me take a few seconds to thank all of the subscribers who submitted their stories. Some of these stories were submitted a long time ago, but I never got around publishing them because I was waiting to collect enough of these road trip and gas station stories so I could make a long compilation video like this. I do apologize to those who waited for a long time, but I think it was worth waiting and putting them all together like this. So thank you again for the awesome stories. A quick question before I let you go. Do you guys notice any difference between this outro audio and the story narrations? Because you see, this outro along with the last two stories have actually been done, or doing I guess, with the Telefunken M82, and the first 7 stories were done with the Audio-Technica AT-A75R. I'm talking about microphones, by the way. I know most of you guys could care less, but I'm trying to see if the sound that I prefer personally aligns with your preference. Let me know in the comment section if you have a clear favorite. I had something funny I wanted to tell you guys, but I think I'll have to push that back to the next video because I'm running out of time and I have to publish this tonight. Oh, one last thing, I almost forget. I'm sorry to all of you who've sent me emails and I couldn't reply to you. I hope you can understand between the comments, the messages here, Facebook and Twitter. I read them all, but it's really difficult to reply to them all. I could either spend my free time on creating contents or on replying to emails. I think most of you guys will prefer that I concentrate on content. I'll pick a date and use the whole day to reply to all your emails. Please don't be offended if I haven't replied to your message, and please know that it isn't because I don't care. I do care. I care a lot, and I appreciate all of you guys. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you always for your support. I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.